Coming to you direct from the nerve center of the galaxy's greatest comic. This is the 2000 AD Thrillcast.
Borak Thung, Earthlets, and Happy New Year, whatever the Beetlejuicean is for that. Welcome back to the 2000 AD Thrillcast. 2019 promises to be a thrill-packed year with a whole slate of new and returning series and also graphic novels. Remember, if you've not signed up to the 2000 AD Thrill Mail, then you should do so immediately. Go to 2000ad.com/Thrill Mail, all one word, and make sure that you get weekly updates on what's happening with the galaxy's greatest comic. I'm your host, Molch-R, and I'm joined by two fellow droids who have donned their fleshy oversuits in order to sound vaguely Terran. Oliver Pickles, graphic novel editor.
Hello.
And Maz Smith, graphic novel editor.
Hello.
Marvellous. So we're going to be talking a little bit about the not 2000 AD as much, but more the kind of other stuff that we're doing this year, just because there's so much of it and it's so varied. So I thought we'd start off the year by focusing on that a little bit. Oliver, I want to come to you first because what we're going to talk about is specifically something that's out in January with the magazine.
Yes.
Do you want to explain a little bit about what we're doing differently with the bagged edition that comes with the Meg?
Well, with the magazine, there's always the bagged supplementary graphic novel. That's usually a reprint, either 2000 AD related, or recently there's been Lofty's One Man Luftwaffe, that kind of thing. But with this, for January through April, we're publishing for the first time in English a graphic novel series called Operation Overlord. It's a French series, but it's one of their best-selling graphic novel series there's been in France in a long time. And it's about the D-Day landings in 1944. And this is the first time it's been English, and we're putting it out under the battle banner. Because I think it would appeal to people who used to read Battle. But if you didn't used to read Battle, that's okay. You can still enjoy these war stories. But yeah, they're that kind of thing.
So the comics industry is very different in France to how it is here, because you have the Bande Dessinée, which is this huge market for quite thin but hardcover graphic novels, as we'd know them. So it's a different kind of proposition in this market where we're used to kind of serialized anthology comics.
Yeah, these graphic novels are they're released in France, as you say, in 48 pages, all in one go. They're not serialized, and so when we're reprinting them, we just wanted to release them all in one go as they are in France, but in a different format, in a format that the magazine readers are familiar with, but still complete and whole, not breaking it up, because the story's not built that way. The story's not built for 6-page chunks. It's built to build up over the course of the 48 pages, and that's how we're doing it.
Yeah. So how many editions is it going to be?
Well, in France, the series is still going on. Right. The 6th one just came out last year, but we're reprinting the first 4 to start with. They're all individual, so if you miss one, it's not a problem. You can just dive right in with the 2 or 3. They're all individual stories. They all take place at the same time frame of D-Day landings. For instance, the second one is about the Omaha Beach landings by Easy Company. And the third one is about the Merville gun battery that needed blowing up the day before, so that the battery didn't destroy the US and UK battleships carrying all the troops. And the fourth one is about the only French commando unit that were attached to the D-Day landings. They were obviously people who, for them, this was like reclaiming their country. So they were very sort of do or die kind of that kind of mentality.
Yeah, because it's interesting that this is the first time we've really done something in translation. As the editor on these books, what was that like? What were the kind of challenges that you faced with something like that?
Well, they're written by Frenchmen, 2 Frenchmen. One, Bruno Falbert, who wrote books 2, 3, and 4, and Michael Legali, who wrote book 1. So they're French, but they're writing American soldiers and British soldiers. So sometimes the slang that they used wasn't quite right, or translating it from English to French, and then for a French market, it probably sounded okay. But then we were translating it back from French into English. So we were translating words that had been said, for instance, by Eisenhower, back into English. And sometimes it was just like, we'll change this a little bit to make it sound a bit more American. Just things like that. Yeah. But otherwise, these are very much kind of war stories. They're very action orientated. There's not a lot of subtlety with the language, but we had a great translator on it. We had a woman called Ivanka Helgenberger who translated Blue is the Warmest Colour into English, which is French film, ended up being adapted from that graphic novel. She's a great translator, and she's done a really good job on these books.
Is there a demonstrably French outlook on the history of the D-Day landings in the books? So obviously, we're used to D-Day and the Normandy landings is filtered through a very English and American point of view. Would you say this was a very French point of view, or have they been quite fair and broad?
I think they've been very broad. For instance, the first book and the second book have focused on American soldiers. The third book has a Canadians attached to the paratrooper unit attacking the Merville gun battery. The fourth book, like I said, did have the only French commando unit involved, but it also follows the British photography unit who filmed and took photographs of the D-Day landings. So it's a very broad, all the countries that were involved. Maybe not all the countries involved. Many of the countries that were involved have been sort of looked at with this series. And like I say, the series carries on past these 4 books. And so there's always new viewpoints. Because the French weren't too heavily involved in the D-Day landings, they couldn't really focus on just the French point of view. But I would also say that there's also the German soldiers get a fair look in on this. In terms of like the average soldier, what he was kind of experiencing with regards to his superiors telling him to fight this war and him not necessarily believing wholeheartedly in it.
Obviously, we're putting out the book under the banner of battle. It's not a recognisably Battle Picture Weekly strip. It's not one of the recurring characters. Why do you think it's important that we're putting out new war stories under that banner?
With the battle brand, if you like that word, with the battle title, this is starting it back up again, and we wanted to do stories that would appeal to the readership of Battle, for sure, but also to bring it back into people's minds, with Sniper Elite as well, last year. And going forward into the future, there'll be other stories. It's unlikely that Battle will return as it was in the 80s, but the spirit of Battle will be brought back to life with these books and with more stories that we've got in the future in new formats.
Because, I mean, war comics used to be the thing in the 70s. That was the whole point of Battle, and you had Warlord as well. All these sort of tales of daring do and sometimes quite comical as well.
Yeah. And Battle wasn't the first. Going back before Battle, there was something called Battle Picture Library, which was very much what Commando kind of copied the format of. Yeah. But yeah, this is very much the spirit of the spirit of the 80s.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. We'll come back and talk to you in a second, Oliver. Maz, I want to have a chat with you about the titles that you're working on for this year, because, I mean, we're putting out more Treasury of British Comics titles this year than we've done in the previous 2 years. What are some of the highlights that you're looking forward to that you've been working on?
That I've been working on is mostly towards the end of the year stuff, but stuff like the second Wildcat book, Loner, is very wonderful and bizarre. It's I remember explaining the plot to you. It's very kind of Alice in Wonderland.
Yeah.
The Wildcat magazine was kind of strangely unique in its kind of 4 not quite interconnecting stories, but 4 stories kind of running parallel with characters who knew each other. And so Loner is the second one of these, and he's a mercenary, and he only works alone, except for his trusty 6-shooter, Babe. And essentially just gets into a lot of bizarre scrapes with psychic aliens, kind of like ends up slightly melted at one point and has to reform, ends up split into 2 like loners of 2 different sizes, which eventually kind of psychically remeld, and he's not typical kind of space bounty hunter things you'd think.
Sure.
But it's absolutely gorgeous stuff.
Yeah, well, I mean, it kind of brings to mind things like Meltdown Man, where it goes very strange very, very quickly and kind of continues on that vein. But it sounds quite sort of thematically different to Turbo Jones, which is just out this week.
Yeah, Turbo Jones is coming out in about 2 days at this point. So I've just been looking at that thinking, has anything gone wrong? Nothing's gone wrong. It's fine. But no, Turbo is much more traditional kind of adventure. So Turbo starts us off in where the Earth has been destroyed and they're looking for somewhere new to kind of settle down and repopulate. And Turbo was the historian, strangely enough, who was kind of spearheading this. So they've got a couple of thousand people on a ship, and Turbo goes down to the planet with himself and his strange robotic monkey companion. It's that kind of book. I love it. It's wonderful. And he meets an alien race who are in the middle of a war with another much more warlike alien race, and kind of ends up commanding forces on one side and then gets kidnapped by the other side. And eventually tidies that up.
Right.
But then there's a couple more kind of interesting little one-off stories at the end, as was kind of typical for lots of the Wildcat strips. So,
and as somebody going back, because this was the 80s. As someone going back and reading that now, what was your initial reaction when for Loner as the story unfolded?
Loner is just how particularly kind of different it was. Like Turbo, though, for it's very kind of good and charming, is quite standard in its adventure feeling. But Loner is really bewildering. Really went in directions that I did not expect at all, and I really, really enjoyed that about it. It splits off about halfway through and gets taken over in a new direction, and taken. I cannot remember who drew the Dracula files.
Oh, Eric Bradbury. Eric
Bradbury takes over the art, and it goes in a kind of different direction and a little bit more of kind of like a Han Solo kind of thing. Yeah. Kind of lone bounty hunter traveling planets and catching aliens, which is good. But the first half is just so incredibly unexpectedly weird. It really grabbed me. It's one of my favorite things I read last year. So,
right. Yeah. Okay. So you're both new to the editing game.
Yes.
Yeah.
I am. I think you are.
Yeah. and
we're great at this.
You've kind of had a deep dive into, I mean, this vast archive that we now have. What's been your reaction to the kind of stuff? Because you've had the opportunity to read some quite varied stuff. So you've got Loner and things like that, but there's also things like Bella at the Bar and all something other. What's it been like, sort of discovering this stuff for the first time?
It's been really, really good.
Yeah.
I've mostly been reading a huge chunk of Ginty. Absolutely insane amounts of Ginty in the archives. And in triplicate, so I keep reading it twice by accident. But yeah, just the sheer variety is great. There's wonderful kind of lots of stories about horrible girls, which are my absolute favourites. And they do usually get a page or two of kind of like redemption and learning a good lesson at the end, but you get a good 80 pages of them being absolutely terrible. It's delicious. It's really, really fun. Those are my favourites, so I'm trying to gather up some of those at the moment. lots of kind of unexpected little treasures were found by different artists who we didn't know. Did kind of like lots of unexpected little one-off strips or kind of short runs. We found like lots of, I think for Misty we're doing is it Jordi Badeo Romero? There's two Romeros.
Yeah.
I believe that is the one that we're doing the collection of.
Yeah.
So we found lots of his stuff in the Misties.
So we're doing that as a kind of art book, aren't we?
We are, yeah. It's gorgeous stuff, and I know there's more of his hidden in the archive. So if we can dig it out, then
that's one of the delights of working with that archive is just how much stuff is completely unknown. You know, it was published and then has effectively sat there gathering dust for 40 odd years. Oliver, what's been your experience? Because I mean, you worked as a comic book retailer. For many years. Has there been anything that's kind of popped up and set your kind of radar off as, ooh?
Yeah, it was really fun to find out one of my favourite comic book artists, Hugo Pratt, drew British war comics for a year.
Yeah.
In 1960 or 1959. That was interesting to see those comics and see a pre-Corto Maltese artist to do his thing on British war comics. But also it's just nice to read, you know, like Ian Kennedy's Air Ace war picture library comics, fighter pilots. Ian Kennedy in the 1960s, like he was before Brian Bolland, but he was drawing like Brian Bolland. You know, he's got that such a clear line, heavy black kind of style, and he's fantastic. It's just nice to see the artists from the 1960s draw comics, and as good as any American comics. Like there's no kind of difference in terms of quality. They're all absolutely rock solid, but they've mostly been forgotten because American comic artists have great reprint programs to keep all their books in print, and so you can appreciate Jack Kirby throughout the 60s and into the 70s, whereas Ian Kennedy has very little in print, and it's great to, one of the things with the Treasury might be to kind of help reappreciate these British artists who've kind of been forgotten, I think.
And one of the things that came out in one of the panels at San Diego when we were talking about the Treasury stuff was we had Zach Davison, who's a manga translator for the American market, and he was in the whole panel drew a direct comparison between today's manga, which covers every subject you can possibly imagine under the sun and every kind of protagonist, to British comics in the 50s, 60s and 70s, where and into the 80s, where you have just anything you could put, you know, I mean, thinking about the stuff we've already reprinted, you know, we've got a story about a fox, got a story about a cop, got a story about a slightly bigoted girl who gets transported to a very, very bigoted future world, you know, and it's just the sheer variety of it is incredible.
There's a whole line of Western comics that haven't been reprinted, really. British comics, but focused on the American West, because that was a big thing.
Yeah.
That was a big thing back in the 50s and 60s.
No, there's whole swathes of wrestling comics, which just was totally unexpected. But so I'm just digging them out wherever I can. They're great. So
this is sort of British wrestling. So
yes.
you're big daddies rather than your Hulk Hogan kind of types.
Kind of 50-50, but
really?
like, very very old kind of feelings.
Yeah,
but a little bit American, but like still some very British stuff in there. It's incredible. So.
Yeah. Well, I think because people know us as a producer of mostly sci-fi, they just assume that that's our focus. But I mean, this opens up everything, really, doesn't it? I mean, in terms of the stuff that we've done already, so we get lots of people asking, when's volume 2 of this coming out? When's volume 2 of that? We're just trying to get as much variety out there as we can, rather than kind of lock into a few series and just do them to completion, aren't we?
Well, the thing about lots of these series is that they ran for years and years and years, and it would take a lot of books to collect up some of them, and they're maybe not our first priorities, some of them. I have special affections for some, but I may be in the minority. But we're trying to find those kind of little one-off gems that we can put out so people can really kind of get a sense of the breadth of what there is.
For instance, Ken Reid's Faceache ran for a very long time.
Yeah.
But Ken Reid did a wide variety of things. We can only publish so many books. Now, we think it would be good to reprint a wide variety of Ken Reid's work rather than just focus on getting the Faceache series in print, in its entirety. Yeah. Show the breadth of an artist's bibliography.
We just did Creepy Creations just for Christmas, didn't we? Which is just, I mean, it's insane.
It's gorgeous. It's absolutely wonderful.
Yeah, and it's kind of, I mean, I was too young for Shiver and Shake, but the kind of humour comics that I was reading as a kid, I remember being fascinated by them, but they were utterly disposable. I never kept any of them. I kept my 2000 ADs, but not my Whizzer and Chips and, whatever Beanos I picked up. I think I moved I moved a box of Beanos from between three houses for the best part of 5 years for absolutely no reason whatsoever. We're kind of spoiled for choice, really, aren't we?
Yes.
And it's your job to bring it to life. Can't wait. Thinking further ahead into 2020, 2021, which seems incredibly futuristic.
It doesn't in editing.
Well, that's the thing, because we've got to make choices almost 2 years in advance. Do you guys want to explain a little bit about, without going into too much detail, the process that we go through when selecting books? Because, Maz, you've already mentioned about we try to keep it to stuff that's kind of one and done, and we can put out in an edition. Is it just a case of diving into the archive, finding
Pretty
something?
Much.
Yeah,
like there's lots of diving in, just reading and seeing what there is. I mean, there's definitely like some resources online and books. But it's niche stuff, so kind of what information we can get without physically reading the comics is limited. So like I'm always doing little Google searches on different artists and trying to figure if you can find a date where something was published and you can go on and read it, it's a lot easier to find out what's there. But yeah, it's mostly just lots of time physically spent reading the archive, which is great fun. I love my job.
And I mean, we've already talked about some of the artists that are getting recognition where perhaps they haven't had it before. Because a lot of these comics are completely anonymous. What do we rely on to find out who did this stuff if it's not immediately obvious?
Anything we absolutely can, really. Research, it's like lots of these artists and writers aren't with us anymore, so they can't speak up and claim their work. It's very easy to identify, or much easier to identify an artist usually, because recognizing a visual style is very distinctive, but identifying writers who are anonymous is quite another matter. So unless someone has declared quite loudly somewhere, it's very difficult for us to find out. But we do what we can.
Yeah. And one of the bittersweet joys of the last couple of years is that some of the creators that we've reprinted have been alive. So I'm thinking someone like John Armstrong, Shirley Bellwood, but then have passed away just at the point where we're getting their stuff back in print, and that's always it's always quite difficult, because you want to honour these people while they're still with us, kind of thing. But as our head of publishing, Ben, has pointed out before, these people are going to get, and their estates are going to get royalties for the first time in 40, since they actually got the paycheck for doing it in the first place. So that's, like I said, it's bittersweet, but it's still quite nice. We'll round out now, but I just want to ask whether there is anything that we've done that you have looked at and gone, well, I enjoyed reading that, but we can't ever publish this. Ignoring all the girls' teenage magazines with pin-ups of Gary Glitter and Jim Will Fix It in. There
is actually a point there. The photo stories can't ever be reprinted.
Right.
Because and there's some kind of moderately famous people in there who went on to do like various soap operas or that kind of thing. Like, very early in their career.
Is that because we don't have the rights to their
we don't have
likenesses?
The rights to their likenesses. I mean, arguably we could pay that fee and get their likenesses, but then maybe they don't want it. Maybe they just refuse it.
I wonder what the market is for the reprints of Teenage Magazine photo strips.
Yeah.
So,
I'd buy them, but I don't have to. I work here.
Just take it off the
I think
shelf.
It's just me. One of the favourite things I found, which is not a comic at all, it's in the Pink magazine. Someone wrote essentially David Cassidy fan fiction about him leaving the Partridge Family. It's all like, yes, David sat in the corner of the set with his head in his hands. Today was the day. He was going to let his contract run out. He hoped the fans would forgive him. It's great stuff. It's wonderful.
Brilliant.
Now, it's nice to see that kind of weird fan fiction thing that is on the internet nowadays has this weird history in kind of old girls' magazines. Sadly, not so much comics, so I don't think something we would be republishing. But I hold it close to my heart. I put a little bookmark in it.
There was, I mean, even in the comics, there was a wonderful kind of naivety to the whole thing because you were talking to children. So even though it was quite often played straight, there's this kind of wondrous innocence about a lot of the magazines and comics that were published at the time. Having flicked through the archives of Pink.
I love them. all the swap shops just asking to send pictures of David Bowie to Australia. It's wonderful. It's absolutely charming.
God, the age before the internet.
I know.
I'd almost forgotten it.
Yeah.
But I mean, that kind of kept going even until the 1990s. I remember the early issues of because I used to read SFX religiously in the 1990s, and there was a section for pen pals where people would include their addresses. That's wonderfully sweet. Just bring down the internet, salt the earth. Let's just get back to writing letters again. Oh no, this has turned into a nostalgia fest. I do apologise, but very much looking forward to the books we're bringing out this year. Thank you very much indeed to Oliver.
Goodbye.
And to Maz.
Thank you.
Thanks to you, Earthlets. Sorry for the brevity of this episode. We're busy making sure that 2000 AD is as thrill-packed as possible. Tune in 2 weeks' time, and we'll be back on the 2000 AD podcast horse with more from the galaxy's greatest comic, Splundig Verthrig.
Alert! Thrill power levels dangerously high. Alert! Read 2000 AD every week. Ask your comic book store or newsagent now. Subscribe to the galaxy's greatest comic at 2000adonline.com. Subscribe digitally on our apps for Apple, Android, and Windows 10. And download DRM free copies from 2000adonline.com. Alert! Stand by for urgent updates. Search for 2000AD on Twitter and Facebook. Watch the latest videos at youtube.com/2000AD online. And follow on Instagram at Insta2000AD. Program complete. Shutting down.